I'm aware that part of me becomes frustrated when I hear phrases like the new normal, or overhear the frequent observation, of course nothing will ever be the same again, when referring to the post-pandemic landscape. Part of me doesn't want a different normal, doesn't want things never to be the same again. Part of me just wants to go back to how things were before the virus rode into town and made us all live masked, constrained, bereaved. This Sunday, the Gospel tells of the beginning of Jesus' ministry at the synagogue in Capernaum. The passage begins with the phrase, filled with the Holy Spirit, connects the beginning of Jesus' work with what's just happened, which was the temptation in the wilderness. That itself is connected with what has happened before, the baptism in the River Jordan, itself introduced by the same phrase, filled with the Holy Spirit. So we're introduced to three consecutive events of critical importance in the life of Jesus: baptism, temptation, and the beginning of ministry, and they're all connected by that same phrase, filled with the Holy Spirit. There's a sense that the forward momentum of the story requires that each event happens in order and that each event results with being filled with the Holy Spirit. The whole movement is summed up in the passage from Isaiah 61, which Jesus chooses in the synagogue. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. That section of Isaiah refers to the return of the exiles from Babylon to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. There's both the joy of return and the acknowledgement of the great suffering of exile. The prophet sees it as his role to proclaim the good news of return, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. The man who proclaims these words on the Sabbath in the synagogue is one who's both experienced the exaltation of baptism and heard the affirming voice of God, and also the pain and deprivation of temptation and wilderness, and heard the voice of the tempter with the insidious what if of doubt, if you really are the Son of God. So if we expected that the affirmation of the filling of the Holy Spirit only comes as a result of exaltation, we're surprised it can also come from temptation and deprivation. As we emerge from lockdown, much though I would like simply to return to normal, carry on as before, I know that the healing of return will not happen until we, accept the invitation to address what the exile of lockdown has shown us. To acknowledge that there's been an experience of the interrelatedness of spirit-filled affirmation as well as spirit-filled deprivation. The affirmation has been seen in expressions of selflessness, community, service, connection, and they've run through the deprivation of the long days of isolation and suffering. The realities of ever-present human selfishness and greed have been corrected and thrown into focus by the quiet witness of loving service. The beginning of Jesus' ministry, which we'll hear again this Sunday, is perhaps an invitation for the church, for you and I, to begin a new journey of service and proclamation of what return from exile can look like. The binding up of the brokenhearted, the proclamation of the year of the Lord's favour. Good news for those who feel lost in the world's wilderness.